Hello everyone, my name is Aron Lidé. I'm from Sweden, and in the puzzle setting world I go under the pseudonym Aspartagcus, which for anyone wondering is a mix between Spartacus and asparagus. Welcome to my puzzle setting video on cracking the cryptic. I will be talking about my puzzle Wheel of Arrows, but before that I will talk a bit about how I got into setting puzzles and some tips I have for anyone interested in setting puzzles. I'm what Tyrganes in his video referred to as a quarantine setter. That is, I started setting puzzles during the COVID quarantine after coming across the Cracking the Cryptic channel on YouTube. I had solved some Sudoku before. I had one of those books with lots and lots of them, but had probably solved fewer than 20 of them. It was an interesting challenge, but the puzzles themselves didn't really engage me, and it felt repetitive quite fast. Then, in the beginning of May last year, I stumbled upon the Sudoku with only 4 digits video and the Miracle Sudoku a few weeks after that, which was really cool. And after I had watched a couple more, I then watched Fistomafel's Chaos Construction, the one entitled The Devil's Hardest Puzzle, and I was completely blown away and really hooked. What I was watching was miles away from what my image of Sudoku was before. So I would just like to thank Cracking the Cryptic for opening my eyes to this beautiful world of puzzles. So after about a month of watching, I decided to give setting a puzzle myself a go on pen and paper, because I didn't know any other way. I finished it when I was out camping with my wife, and it was fun, but it was kind of a hassle with all the erasing. And in the end, it looked like this. You can see a lot of scribbling. But it was a lot of fun. And I got to hear about the Discord server. So I went there to get people to test it. And I learned about F puzzles and Pempa, which made things a lot easier. And over this past year, I've made a bunch of friends on the server. One of the very first ones I got to know was the new and very unknown setter Codec, whom some of you might have heard of since then. So I started setting almost a year ago, and from October last year, I've had the privilege to have 5 of my puzzles, or 5 puzzles with my name on them, featured on the channel so far. Before we delve into this puzzle, I'd like to share a few tips I've learned during the past year and the way that I set puzzles in general. What I see when I look at an empty grid, be it Sudoku or some other pencil puzzle, is a canvas of potential which I get to decide what to do with. And it all depends on which mood I'm in and which ideas I have floating around in my head at the moment. So I have a few different ways of starting to set puzzles. The way most people do it, I imagine, is to play around with some well-known constraints like thermometers or arrows and try to find some interesting interaction between these. And I often do that as well. Sometimes I feel that it can be hard to find something new and interesting with some common constraints. Wheel of Arrows is an exception to this. So the second way that I start a puzzle, which I've done from the very beginning, is to find an interesting rule set that no one has explored before. In that way, I get to cash in on the interesting logic that hasn't been found by anyone else. And it feels like you're kind of treading on uncharted land. But when you create your rule sets, keep in mind that it's good to keep it simple. Otherwise, potential solvers might just go and solve something less complicated. My first Sudoku ever is a good example where I had little killer clues which sum up to either the even digits or the odd digits in the diagonal. So it's very simple to understand, but it's got some interesting logic coming with it. I also often set hybrids between Sudoku and other pencil puzzles as a way to make a new rule set, which has the advantage of making it easier for people who know the rules of both puzzles to get into it. And I like the challenge of getting the rules to work together. And my first feature, my Hashiwo Kakeru Sudoku, is an example of such a puzzle. I've made other hybrids with Slitherlink and Acre, and I think it's really fun. I've got some more in the pipeline. But sometimes these can be quite tricky to get to work, to get a unique solution. So I've had to use some extra clues, like here I have arrows, and in this one I have a couple of extra crop key dots. Another way that I start to set puzzles is that I try to draw something on the grid. I'm really into aesthetically pleasing puzzles. I often use thermometers to do such puzzles. I guess you've seen a lot of other people do that as well, not the least like Lucy, Audrin. For example, my zombie thermocalypse, I made a propeller with some bullet holes and some St. Lucy buns. But you can also use other constraints like clones, and I've used some palindromes, and I've also come up with some new interesting constraints myself, like this digital clocks Sudoku, where each clock has to contain a valid timestamp. So I really like coming up with these kind of interesting puzzles. And you might think that when you create something that is aesthetically pleasing, it might be that the drawing would remove some of the nice logic, but there is a lot of solutions that can be made to one Sudoku grid, so you will probably be able to find some nice logic. If you like those kind of puzzles, I encourage you to try it out. So when I set such puzzles, I usually start by positioning the most central clues to make it look like something. Like this zombie thermocalypse, I placed the big guys in the middle, and I worked on the other ones down here, and this guy up here, he's the one that disambiguated the whole grid, or the rest of the grid in the end. Might not be easy every time, but it works out well most of the time. There's usually two ways that I set, if I disregard which way I start and what my goal is. Either I will try to set something, I take each step meticulously, each clue I add, I go through how it changes the grid and what kind of new clues I can add after that. So I set each clue after the other. That's to make it as interesting as possible, to keep check of my soul path. But often I do what I call exploratory setting, where I just try something out, and sometimes that just works out perfectly. An example of where I got really lucky was my puzzle What Time Is It?, which has an image of a Roman digits clock. So I thought it might be interesting to make a clock Sudoku. So I positioned these Roman numerals in a ring like this, where each of them, they are a sum, like these two would add up to 5, these would add up to 6, and so forth, except for the 1 and 2. These are differences between these two cells. And I thought, oh, maybe I can do something fun with this. And then I just tried to do a palindrome as a frame around it. And all of a sudden, half of the grid was solved, and I could finish the whole thing off with just these arrow hands to put in the middle. Another one that was really even more of a shock was my Daredevil puzzle, where I had these 2D figures, which are clones, so the digits on each of these have to be the same. So this one would have to be the same as this digit. And each of these letters represent a unique digit. So I had been playing around with some thermoses around to try to get it to work, and it just didn't work, and I was about to give up. And then I just tried these two that are the same length and looks perfectly fine, and they just gave me a unique solution, which was really interesting also in terms of solving it. So I was completely shocked. And sometimes you get lucky, but to get lucky, you gotta try some stuff. So a few practical tips to you who are interested in starting to set puzzles. I would say keep a document with the puzzle ideas that you write down. It has come in handy for me. I often think of puzzle ideas and then I forget about them, but I always keep a document on Google Keep, which works out well because I often shift between setting on my computer and setting on my phone. And I keep a different document where I have my ongoing puzzles. I save links to half-done versions of my puzzles, which is very useful, especially if you are at a point in your setting where you're unsure about which your next clue will be. I find that it's very good practice. So you can go back or you can open a different tab. It's good for being able to go back, and so that you make sure that you don't lose your progress if your page reloads, which is quite annoying. I usually just move my idea from my ideas list to this ongoing puzzle list and add links as I go along with some comments saying, this clue didn't work for this and this reason. And in the end, when I finish it, I put in all these notes and comments into a different document where I have all my finished puzzles, with the final solution and the link for solving the puzzles as well. Another tip for a new setter is to try not to cram in as many different constraints as possible. When I see a puzzle and there's just too much going on of different types, I'm not as eager to pick it up. I don't know how everyone else is, but that's me. Obviously, puzzles where you have a good reason for it, like for example, Timono has his Everything is Rogan, where he's just put everything in. And I've seen some puzzles where you have one constraint per box, and that's fine. Sounds interesting. But yeah, try to keep it clean and aesthetically beautiful and inviting. And I would also say don't use uniqueness as a step in your solve path. That is to use the fact that the puzzle only has one unique solution as a way to rule out a setup of digits that would create a deadly pattern, or of two or more solutions, sorry. I've done that in one of my earliest puzzles, and while I at the time thought it was an interesting step, I have since changed my mind about that. Another thing I learned by experience was in my first version of my Hashiwo Kokeru puzzle, I had a 13 little killer clue outside of the grid. And this was used as the final disambiguator instead of the two crop key dots I had in the final solution. And because there was only one of those clues and it was located outside of the grid, all three testers ended up completely forgetting about this clue. And when I told them about it, that they shouldn't forget about this clue, they were all like, oh my god, I'm banging their heads against the wall. So I just advise, don't use a single clue like this outside, or a single clue of a certain constraint. Just doesn't look as nice, and for me also these crop key dots just made the solve nicer, and it made it look nicer, just like smaller circles. So another tip, if you invent a new rule set, as I said before, try to keep it somewhat simple to understand. Many puzzles, and myself included, my own puzzles, have been skipped because of difficulty understanding the rules. Sometimes the rules can be quite simple to use, but hard to explain. So make sure you're very precise in your wording of the rules. I've had a few of these, yeah, my hybrid puzzles, especially in my acre. Yeah, there's a lot of rules because you combine two different puzzle types. And in these cases especially, I like to have an example puzzle that people really can see how the logic works, which I would really recommend to have. I try to have that whenever I have a new and interesting rule set. And you can even release this smaller puzzle as a teaser or on the server. I've done that, and if people like this one, they will kind of be eager to try the bigger one, and it's not as big of an investment in time and effort to try a smaller one. So I think that's a good tip. Yeah, and in these setting videos there has been a lot of talk of Sudokus, and I just want to take a moment to promote other pencil puzzle types. There are so many other genres that you can try out. There's a site called Puzzlink, which has a tool where you can create all kinds of different puzzles. And it's really a cool place. We have Nori Nori, we have Litz, we have Heyawake. Yeah, we all have Slitherlink, Masyu, all kinds of things. Hashiwo Kakeru, Shikaku. Yeah, you see there's lots. So I would just encourage you to try out setting some other types. There's a lot of other fun puzzle types to try besides Sudoku. And a lot of these are a lot quicker than Sudoku, so you can set or solve a lot of these in the same time as you would solve a Sudoku, especially these new really hard ones that a lot of people set. If you are new to setting and you just start out setting, it can be a bit discouraging sometimes if someone doesn't solve your puzzle, but keep in mind that there's a lot of people setting puzzles, so have patience. And if I don't get any solves after a while, I often ask if someone wants to test my puzzle in exchange for me testing theirs. Lastly, if you want to try to set puzzles yourself, but feel like these puzzles that you see on the channel are way beyond anything you could create, know that the end result that you see is not something that we have thought up on the spot or something we manage to create every time we sit down to set a puzzle. Far from it. In my puzzle documents that I mentioned earlier, my list of ideas for puzzles has more entries than the one with puzzles that I have started on but not managed to finish, and that in turn has more entries than the one with finished puzzles. And it's also not only about how difficult a puzzle is. There are lots of easy, medium difficulty puzzles that are just beautiful. And as I have set puzzles over this past year, my setting skills have improved a lot, of course. Some people set really, really good puzzles to start with. I have seen some debut puzzles that are just insane. But for a lot of us, you have to work for it a bit, and that's fine. I would just encourage you to try it out. I find it a lot of fun to set puzzles myself. And I think that each person has a different way of approaching setting puzzles. So think about what kind of puzzles you want to set and just go for it. With that said, on to the main part of this video, the Wheel of Arrows puzzles that I set a while ago, which looks like this. It's an arrow little killer Sudoku, where the digits on the arrows have to sum to the digit in the circle, and the number outside of the grid indicate the sum of all the digits on this diagonal here, for example, and this indicates the number on this diagonal. So a while ago, Simon featured this puzzle, and I was absolutely stoked about that, as it's one of my favorite creations. Simon's solve was all I could ask for. He was following the intended solve path up to the very end, and it took him almost 1 hour and 20 minutes to solve. So if you wish to solve this, or you want to watch Simon's solve of it, you will have to pause this video now and follow the link to that video in the description, because I am going to go ahead and spoil it now. I just want to say thank you again to Simon and Mark for featuring my puzzles on the channel. There's always been a lot of positive feedback from both you in the videos and in the comments, but with this puzzle in particular, I was quite overwhelmed by the response I got. A lot of people ask me how on earth I set this thing. I especially enjoy the feedback I got from Totally Normal Cat, who tested it, and he said it was probably the most interesting use of set theory that he's ever seen. And Glipperall chatted with me afterwards, and he said that it was like I had composed a symphony where everything works together. So thanks for those kind words. But due to the interest expressed, I asked Simon if they'd be interested in a video where I explain how I set this puzzle. And I got an affirmative answer back, so here we are. So how did I start to set Wheel of Arrows? On the 19th of March this year, I had what I thought was a great idea for a thermometer puzzle, which I managed to set within an hour, which is quite unusual for me. And it's called Thermal Scope. And if you want to try it out, maybe there will be a link under the video. You will have to pause now then. So the idea I had was to make use of the Fistomethod ring, which followers of this channel should be quite familiar with. For those who aren't, I'll do a quick explanation. So in Sudoku, each row and column and box is a set of the digits 1 to 9. And this fact can be used in multiple ways to equate different sets of cells with each other, saying that they have to contain the same digits. And we do this by taking a group of one or more sets of the digits 1 to 9 and comparing them with another group of sets of the digits 1 to 9, removing any cells that appear in both groups. This technique is called set equivalence theory, or SET for short. So a simple example is to compare two overlapping sets, like one of a box here, we can highlight that as green, and one of a row, which I will make purple. So the overlapping digits here we can remove from both sets, and we can see that these digits have to be exactly the same as these digits. I hope you can see that. And the Fistomethod ring is the most famous of these setups. I think Simon often uses the columns and rows, he starts with those, but I like to use the boxes instead. So if we take these 4 sets of the digits 1 to 9, we make them green, and we compare them to these 4 sets. They will equal each other. So we have some overlapping sets. If we take this row, we can remove these and these because they appear in both, and we can add these. Similarly, we remove these and add these. We can take this column, we remove these, add these, remove these, add these, and remove these. So we can now say that the digits in the green are the same digits as they are in the purple cells. And this is called the Fistomethod ring. Now, for this puzzle, I had the idea to cover the whole of the ring with non-end parts of thermometers and let some of the end parts go into the 2x2 boxes in the corners. So the break-in was to realize that there could be no 1 or 9 in any of these cells, or in any of these cells, because digits have to increase in thermometers, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that breaks for some reason. We can see that none of these can be 1 or 9 because they are not on the start or end. So that would mean that even these digits here could not be 1 or 9, and we could say that this has to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that's how to start this puzzle. So the puzzle turned out fine. It was not my greatest finish, but I really liked the break-in. It was more of an experimental puzzle, a quick one. And I really liked the break-in, so I thought maybe I can get it to work with the arrow constraint. So I tried to create a version with arrows where I did something like this. So the idea here would be to see that these digits here contain the same as these here. Oh, with this one as well. But you can see that there are a lot of digits on arrows here, and these will have to be put into these circles as well. So I could put a high 9 here, for example, and this 9 can be put in one of these, but then I would have to put an 8, maybe have a 1 here with a 7, this is 8, maybe this is 9, and I could put the 9, I don't remember exactly, but I would have a 1 with a 7, and then I could put the 8 here and so forth. It didn't really work out. I could never get this to work. I think there was like one digit that was too high or something, but I didn't get it to work. And if I changed it, it just wasn't interesting anymore. So I tried a lot of different setups, but it didn't work with this setup of the Fistmofeld ring. But I didn't want to give up this idea, so I thought about shifting the ring out one step. So what I did was to position arrow circles like this and put the arrows on lines like this, because I could use the same way of having these squares and remove these and adding these. So this is like a blown up Fistmofeld ring, so to speak. So I thought, yeah, this could be quite interesting. And I liked how it looked as well. I'm a lot about the aesthetics. And not long after I set up this, I thought of Joseph Nemes' Encaged 9 puzzle, which is really nice, and it was featured on the channel as well. And he had these arrows that just start diagonally adjacent to the middle box and have one arrow in like this. And I was also reminded of this because my arrows were kind of reminiscent of these boxes that go in this area here. And if you want to, you can check this out. It's got 100% of the 44 salts. So really, really good puzzle as well. So I thought, yeah, why not add these and we'll see what happens. I got that each of these had to be different. And I could see that this was really, really interesting. I was quite pleased what appeared. I got the knowledge about the digits in the circles and some of the digits on the arrows, but not their location. And I got quite excited from this. So I saw that it could become an interesting puzzle if I handled it correctly. And I immediately noticed that the 7, 8, and 9 have to go in one of these 4. Since the 6 could also be placed on an arrow. And I figured I'd work with that and try to limit one of the center cells of the corner boxes. I was contemplating adding more arrows, but I felt like it would only clutter up what I already had. So I decided to go with little killer clues. Also because how perfectly they would line up with the gray and purple, green and purple. So I added a little killer 8 clue here. Now when I add clues, I try to add them in a way that they are they only give as much as I need for my next step. So I decided to make this an 8 because that's the highest number I could use to rule out the 6. So solving your puzzle as much as possible with the clues you have is a good practice. Even if you aim to make an easier puzzle and you get to see what possibilities you have left and what might be a good way forward. So I solved it as far as I could, and I realized that I had to have ones on each of the arrows. So I had to have ones in the greens as well in each of these boxes, which meant that they couldn't be put in the corner, which Simon noticed. And I really like this deduction, so I wanted to make my next step dependent upon that deduction, at which point I added the 15 little killer clue here, making it as large a total as possible, because the deduction that the 1 has to be there has already limited it in a way, and I wanted to give the solver something for finding this deduction. So they could then realize that since 1 has to be on one of these, this would have to be 9 because I couldn't put the second 6 in the green. And this deduction, it was necessary to do, and I really liked that as well. It was just an extra thing that popped up, which I really liked. Then I solved as far as I could again, and as things turned out, these had to be 1 and 5, and the 5 now could not go on the 8th arrow. I did not plan this, it's just something that popped up, because I would have to put 4 2s in the arrows if I put the 5 on the arrow. So I would end up with a 2 there, and these would mean that there can't be any 2 in this box. Whoops. And yeah, the 5 that is in the green could then only go there. So this, after I noticed this, I felt like, wow, this I really have to keep. So far, everything should be recognizable by people who have seen the video or solved the puzzles themselves. But at this point, instead of looking at the long diagonals, which was the next step in the solve, I started working on the top right 3 cell diagonal because I just didn't see this. So I added a 12 little killer here, and I worked on that, and I got some more digits from that, but nothing overly interesting. And this is where my first partway setting link in my puzzle document is at. See, it looks something like this. I usually set in Pempa Plus. I like it that it's very flexible in terms of which shapes and stuff I can use. I can do a lot of interesting things when it comes to new rule sets. I use F puzzles often to help me to solve while I'm setting. So I'm jumping between F puzzles and Pempa Plus. So I had set a 12 here, as we can see, and I had gotten some coloring of these. This one that is here has to be in one of those, so forth. And you can see here I've written the digits that have to be in both the green and the purple, which help me when I'm setting. And another thing about Pempa is I find it more friendly when I'm setting on mobile, and I like to be able to jump between devices when I set. But so I used F puzzles to help me to solve further because I wanted to see how far I could get. I didn't only use logical steps here. I did some testing with a solver, tried some stuff out, and could rule out, not in a way that would be logically solvable by someone who solves it, but just so that I could rule out some to see where I would end up. And I could see that I got with this 12 clue here, I would get 9 would always be opposite to 7, and 8 and 6 would be opposite. And this is when I noticed the long diagonals could really be interesting. And I didn't want this, that one of the diagonals would be larger than the other one, because I wanted to keep them as average as possible. Especially since these are doubled, it would make an even bigger difference in the values of these long diagonals. So I couldn't keep the 12 little killer diagonal because I didn't want the long diagonals to directly help out to find out which arrow had which digit, which they would with this. So the 12 little killer was changed to an 11. Then I ended up tentatively throwing in another 11 little killer on this one, both because it was, I think it was almost given that it was supposed to be there. And also I like the aesthetics. I like when the clues are symmetrically placed. And also I thought it might not make that much of a difference for the solve path. So back to the long diagonals. I wanted the sums to be as close as possible to each other in value to leave the circle values ambiguous, and as average as possible to steer the solver away from looking at them in the beginning of the puzzle. And that is something that I very intentionally did with all of these little killer clues. In his solve, Simon very quickly dismisses them in the beginning, just as I wanted, so that he could focus on finding this set theory breaking. And even later on, he tried working on the long diagonals too early and was met with too many degrees of freedom, just as I wished. So as the setter, I have a job to try to lead the solver down the path I wish them to take, for them to enjoy the logical steps I have put in. I want them to not have to search among too many things, but to be able to find the logic with the things that are available. So we had a discussion about this on the server. You can often end up with unfortunate situations where you unintentionally or unavoidably insert clues that create a totally different solve path that bypasses the logic that you intended. Sometimes people end up bifurcating because they don't find the right way forward if the puzzle is too hard, and they end up not enjoying it at all. And I find it very unfortunate when that happens, not because the puzzle becomes easier, but because of the loss of enjoyment for the solver, and possibly some misleading ratings of the puzzle. In the end, we make puzzles, or at least I do, to share our ideas and the beauty of them, and what gives me energy more than anything else as a setter is when I hear from people who solved my puzzles that they enjoy them, especially if they share some more detailed feedback. So the Discord server has been very valuable for this, where people very often do this, and I try my best to do that as well when I solve other people's puzzles. A few words can mean a lot, especially to setters who are new in the game. So back to the diagonals. I didn't actually have that many choices for the totals, if I wanted to keep them quite average and similar. So I just started trying some totals close to the ones I decided on in the end. I didn't initially think about combining them, but I wanted to work with parity, which has proven useful in other puzzles that have been featured on the channel. And I managed to find the 55 and the 53 diagonals. The 55 and the 53 diagonals. And at this point, I want to jump forward in time to when I put this puzzle up for testing on the Discord server. So this puzzle really looked like a codec puzzle to me, and he's made a few fantastic arrow and little killer combination puzzles. Like, for example, Orbit, we have 58, and one of my favorites is 123 ... 9. So I was thinking of this one, and I sent this puzzle via direct message to Codec and asked if he wanted to solve it, and he did. So he decided to do a live solve of it on the server, which Totally Normal Cat saw, and he decided to give it a go as well, as did Pulverizing Pancake. So I was watching these, I was watching Codec solving, and the other two were solving as well. And watching people live solve your puzzle and being there to give feedback and hear their lines of thoughts, it's really interesting and useful for a setter. So Totally Normal Cat got to this part with the diagonals a bit earlier, and he got there a bit before Codec, and somehow both Totally Normal Cat and me counted wrong and thought that there were actually two ways for the 2s, 3s, and 4s to go in the green. So we had figured out that these all had to be, these digits could only be 2s, 3s, and 4s. And 1s there as well. So we had counted wrong, and we thought that there were two ways for these 2s, 3s, and 4s to come to be positioned in the green or along the diagonals. And we thought that the puzzle might be broken, or at least the solve path, and we alerted Codec to this fact, and after that he stopped his solve to wait for a fix, and he went offline. And then Pixel Plucker came along and he helped us out to put us straight. And after this, he and Totally Normal Cat went on to finish solving the puzzle and give me some feedback. So why did I tell this story? I just wanted to show that we make mistakes when we set and we solve puzzles. We're not perfect, and that's okay. And I wanted to show that being a part of the Discord server community has made a huge difference for me and others when it comes to setting puzzles. So the continuous bouncing off of ideas and helpful tips and discussions has just been great. So I had my long diagonals fixed, and again I solved as much as I possibly could. I found that 2s had to be on the top and left 3 cell arrows. So these had to contain 2s because I had definitely a 2 in one of those, and a 2 in one of those, and a 2 in one of those. So I found that, and I could say that these couldn't be 8 because 8 would be 1, 3, 4. So those were 6, 7, 9. And these were 6, 7, 8. This was not 9. So that gave me that 8 couldn't be up here, but had to be here, which meant that 8 would have to be down here in this box. At this point in the solve, Simon used the fact that since 8 couldn't be in the top circle, 7 couldn't be in the bottom circle, because each of these had to add up to 15, the two opposing sides. And this I completely missed. When I think about it now, I don't understand how I could. But as you all know, even great solvers like Simon and Mark miss things that might seem obvious to a lot of us. And that's just the way it is. This point in the solve was my biggest fear. At this point, I can show you where I was. I had these digits. So I had worked out that 8 couldn't go in column 8 in box 9. And it couldn't go here because either it would be here or here. So those were ruled out. So I was left with 2, 3, 6, and 7. And this here had 1, 2, 3, or 4. If I put 6 in row 7, column 7, I would end up removing these 6s here and having 1, 2, 3. I would have a 1, 2, 3, 7 quintuple. So that doesn't work. So that was actually the way I thought would be the way forward. So that removed 6 from this one, which helped you to go further in the solve. And Totally Normal Cat, of course, he found the way that Simon did, where the 7 was ruled out on the arrow because 8 can't be the opposite side circle. And I asked him specifically about how he got past that part, and he told me, and I believe I told him something along the lines that if I had been smart, I would have used that. So again, we miss things, and again, it's really great with community for a setter. Having gotten the digits in the circle, I again solved as far as I could, and I got to this position here. I found some really nice and unexpected interaction between the center box and the arrows. The 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 5 quintuple here, quadruple, sorry, which put 5 here, so I couldn't have 5 here, which gave me a 1, 2, 4 triple, which put a 6 here, and that put a 6 up here. So I didn't have many digits in boxes 2, 4, 6, and 8, and I wanted to put clues in those boxes to finish the puzzle. When you add clues to your puzzle, you of course have many options, but if you want to make sure that a clue you add have a big impact in terms of solving a lot of the grid and doesn't accidentally destroy parts of your previous logical solve path, you can consider to add clues that touch cells with a lot of options. So I decided on these 2 diagonals, this one and this one, because I liked the symmetry and there were already given digits on them. There was this 9, there was this 6, there was this 6. At this point, I basically tried every single combination of values. Most of them either had no solutions or they had multiple solutions, and I ended up with 4 possible combinations with unique solutions. And they are in my comments. You can see here I had 4 different unique solutions. I had the left 34, right 23, and I thought this was quite nice. And this, which I ended up using, 31 and 26, had the most average values and was also the hardest. I think I actually mentioned in a comment in the YouTube video of Simon Solve that it was the most average, but not the hardest. That is wrong. It is definitely the hardest one. So I ended up choosing the most average values. And there was a lot of jumping back and forth between the diagonals. And you had to realize that there had to be exactly 2 9s on the diagonals together, because maybe these were not, I couldn't put the 9 here yet, I'm not really sure. But at least we had to have 1 9 here, 1 9 here. And because of the values, you had to have either this 9 would be on this diagonal, or this 9 would be on this diagonal. And the 9s that are put in these, either this 9 would be put on this diagonal, or this 9 would be put on this diagonal. So you had to use that to get further in the solve. And so I actually made 2 versions of the puzzle. I released the hard one as the one I wanted to go for, but I also added the one with the 36 on the left side as an alternative. 31 and 26. So I released this with an alternative version, and I'm not sure if anyone solved their alternative version, but the feedback I got from Totally Normal Cat and Pulverizing Pancake was that the difficulty of the end game kind of matched the difficulty of the rest of the puzzle. And I have since become aware that the last part was the hardest part for a lot of people, and that it was kind of a grind and not as enjoyable as the beginning and the middle part. And I understand that, so with that in mind, I might have chosen the version with 36 here instead. But I did quite like the fact that there was a unique solution with such average values here. So now I had finished the puzzle and I didn't know what to name it, and I tentatively gave it the name Discus because I thought it kind of looked like a discus. and I created the link to the puzzle and all that. Then I wanted to go through the logic one more time. And as I was doing my calculations and trying to see if I could get to the solution in an alternative way, I suddenly realized I did not need those 11 clues at all. And I think that with these 11 clues there, the step where you had to rule out the 2s from row 1, column 7 and row 7, column 1, because there was some interaction between the 2-3 pair here and the 1-2 pair here, that would not be needed. And I really like that step. And Simon said he didn't know what to call it, but I like to call it a wonky X-swing, where this row acts together with this column, and they both have to contain, these two diagonals have to contain 1, 2. So it's kind of like an X-wing, but it's moved like this. Yeah. I'm also quite sure that solvers would try to use the 11 clues to their advantage, while I actually wanted them to find the logic elsewhere with the long diagonals. So sometimes it can be a good idea to look at your clues after you've set the puzzle to see if all of them are necessary anymore, since the puzzle has changed since you started setting. And even more important, however, and this I have learned the hard way more times than I would like to admit, is to double check your solve path. Do it rigorously and more than once, especially if you're using some new complicated rule set. A couple of my favorite puzzles ended up wasting a lot of testers' time until I realized there was either, in one case, no clean logical path forward, and in another one, I had missed one option in the opening, which led to an extra 200 solutions at least, which isn't that great. One puzzle I spent over a week on, with very intricate logic and a wonderful endgame and a really beautiful aesthetics, only to realize that in the very first step I had a flaw and I could do nothing about it. And that was like a gut punch. Learn from my mistakes, don't do that to yourself. Check your logic. And if you're unsure, or even if you're not, don't hesitate to get input from someone else. People are generally nice, they won't steal your idea, and you'll probably get some nice feedback. So in the end, I did the 11 clues. I changed the name of the puzzle and submitted it for testing on the Discord server. And the rest is history. I knew it was a very nice puzzle. I did not quite expect it to get featured, but I'm very happy that it did. So once again, thank you Simon and Mark for your hard work and for showcasing these wonderful puzzles to all of us every day. Thank you all for watching, and for any setter out there, new or experienced, I wish you all the best in your future setting endeavors. Let's get cracking!